Now, cranberry roots run deep in Harwich. It's very important to the history of Harwich. And what's been happening is in other parts of the country, and even in Canada, there's been an oversupply of cranberries. And that has been driving down prices. So some growers locally on the Cape have been looking to exit the market because they haven't been able to turn a profit. And Harwich Conservation Trust is an alternative for those growers. We can acquire their properties and turn them into these very scenic and enjoyable conservation destinations.
If we left everything alone here, we can see a little bit, but there's a retired cranberry bog with pine trees that are about 20 feet tall or so. And so these cranberry bogs, underneath the bog surface is organic peat that developed there for thousands of years. And that was the base for that wetland ecosystem before the cranberry farming. During the farming, over the last 100 to 150 years, the farmers spread sand on top of the peat, a little bit of sand every couple of years to help stimulate plant growth and keep down the weeds. And that's developed into about 1.5 feet or 2 feet of sand on top of that peat. And so it's really converting what was a wetland into more of an upland site where pitch pine and other upland plant species survive. So it would tip, and we see a lot of abandoned bogs around the region that are often pitch pine trees. You can still see the ditches out there. So it's still an important ecosystem, but it's not the wetland ecosystem that it once was and that we have a real lack of.
Because of the commercial cranberry farming that had taken place on this property over the past century or more, certain ecological processes had suffered over time. The water quality and flow, habitat diversity had diminished, and downstream, Saquatucket Harbor has been suffering from water quality issues.
Most of our bays are polluted with those nitrogens and nutrients in the water, and there are multiple ways of reducing that, and one of them is wetland restoration, so that the water that is coming into these wetlands is getting cleaned by the ground and water interactions and the interactions with the vegetation before it goes out into our bays and estuaries. You know, I think it's really hard to know what the future is sometimes. You know, I would say that for the most part, people have good intentions. You know, when they began farming this land, it was an opportunity to survive here through farming, to provide a crop for people that was needed. And, you know, we all have enjoyed living here on Cape Cod, and each of us has an impact on the landscape.
There's been 3 phases of this eco-restoration project. The planning phase, the permitting phase, and now we're in the eco-restoration construction phase. Altogether, the cost of the eco-restoration construction phase is estimated to be about $2.5 million. Prior to that, to cover costs of permitting and planning, it's taken several $100,000 to finish those phases, the planning and permitting phases. We're still working on completing that last visitor enhancement phase with constructing the parking area, the new wheelchair accessible trailhead, and the scenic overlook. We estimate the cost to finish that portion to be about $600,000.
So in addition to the ecological restoration is retaining the recreational opportunities and also improving them. So there'll be a full trail loop around here that will be fully accessible to wheelchairs and all people, all abilities to get around this site, so that anybody can see and observe you know, the wildlife. We can hear the birds around us right now. They're going to continue afterwards. And anybody will now be able to come to this site And Robert F. Smith, who this area is named after, this preserve is named after, he was the president of the Harwich Conservation Trust prior to Mike. And he was fully wheelchair bound at the end of his life. So this site means a lot to the trust for that. And there'll be other trails throughout the whole site that will get people in and around these wetlands to be able to see everything that's going on here.
Yeah, the eco-restoration path has been one of consensus building, many minds at work, a lot of experience that we've been leaning on.
We are often trying to come up with solutions that are nature-based, that blend into the landscape and are using the form and function of our natural resources around us to restore those ecological functions.
So the goals of the eco-restoration project include enhancing the water quality of Cold Brook as it flows through the wetlands on its way down to Saquatucket Harbor on Nantucket Sound. Another goal is to enhance the wildlife habitat diversity. And a third goal is to enhance the visitor experience.
Regarding sea level rise and climate change, this particular project is a coastal site, near coastal site. The downstream end is within the tidal prism, so we do get tides that come into the site, and the recent really high tide came up and over a few of the land surfaces. We expect sea levels to rise, and we expect that tide to continue to come into the site. So areas that will be freshwater wetland right when construction is finished will in the future be transitioning into other types of wetlands, transitional salt marsh and then eventually salt marsh. So this site becomes an area that will see those changes actively happening over time, over decades or hundreds of years. Other elements of climate change include changing precipitation, greater frequency of high storm events, but also greater frequency of droughts. And these ecological wetland restoration projects have an incredible resiliency to that as well. They soak up the water really well, and they also remain pretty wet during those drought years. In Massachusetts, we've lost, I think, between 30 and 50% of our wetlands since colonization, and in other states it's a lot more. And so this is an opportunity to get some of those wetlands back and some of those wetlands functions. Wetlands provide huge service for us as humans to against climate resiliency and against climate change. Flood storage. Wetlands provide that flood storage if we have higher amounts of rain coming out of the sky, and provide that that robustness in the ecosystem and resiliency to the changes around us.
Why this project is important to me personally is having been raised on the Cape, I witnessed a lot of change. I witnessed a lot of habitat displacement and loss of natural places. And that made quite an impact on me as a youngster. And so whenever I see an opportunity to save and preserve a piece of land, or now bring back the health of an area such as this Cold Brook site, it's close to my heart, and I feel that it makes a lasting local difference.
We're right now about halfway through construction, with the heavy work being estimated to finish at the end of April, and then the trails, bridges, and plantings being done by the end of June, and potentially the parking lot finished up over the summertime. I'd say something that I learned growing up and then has been reinforced through conversations with some of the indigenous community members around here, is thinking about the impact of our decision on the next 7 generations. And so it's not something that we often think about, but everything that we do out on this landscape, what the decisions that we're making in designs, decisions that we're making as a group to come together to think about these sites for ecological restoration or water quality improvements, that has impacts